Hey guys! Tonight we crack open a story that blends conquest, curiosity, and ancient stone faces with enigmatic smiles. You're standing on the blistered shores of Egypt in 1798, boots sinking into warm sand, cannon wheels creaking behind you, and the air thick with the smell of gunpowder, citrus peel, and camels that regret everything. Napoleon Bonaparte has just arrived, leaning dramatically from a ship, probably rehearsing his future memoirs, and his eyes are scanning horizons, not just for military victories, but for mysteries older than empires. You trudge through Alexandria's alleys, past crumbling walls and market stalls, where vendors trade in spice, ink, and the occasional hieroglyphic souvenir. The French fleet has landed not merely to take territory, but to collect knowledge, sketch monuments, and possibly mispronounce ancient deities. Napoleon isn't just the general here. He's the conductor of a symphonic invasion, blending Enlightenment ambitions with imperial swagger. The soldiers are an odd mix. Some grizzled veterans mutter about dates and dysentery, while younger officers scribble notes on the architecture around them. It's history meets chaos. Bonaparte himself inspects ruined columns with the intensity usually reserved for maps. His dream? To make France the new Rome, with a dash of Sphinx spice. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You follow Napoleon inland. The desert breathes heat at you like a bakery's open mouth. In the distance, stone silhouettes emerge from sandstorms. Egypt doesn't whisper its secrets, it roars them with paws. You squint as the Great Sphinx comes into view, and Napoleon, well, he starts talking to it.
You shield your eyes as the dust settles, revealing something massive, ancient, and oddly contemplative. The Great Sphinx of Giza. Its face, weathered, eroded, possibly missing a nose, is half lion, half pharaoh, all mystery. It stares across the desert, unfazed by Napoleon's arrival, as though it already knows how this ends. You trudge closer, the sun painting gold streaks across the limestone, and watch as French boots leave fresh imprints at the base of this monument carved before Moses got a library card. Napoleon halts, gazes upward, and spends longer looking at the Sphinx than any battle map. His entourage follows suit, scientists holding sketch pads, officers polishing monocles, and one cook wondering if the nose was edible. No one has answers, just awe. The Sphinx quickly becomes a symbol, too enigmatic for mere conquest, too iconic to ignore. Napoleon scholars describe it as an ancient sentinel of reason and power. You whisper, it looks tired. But the general sees destiny. To him, the Sphinx represents endurance, empire, and perhaps a cryptic dare. Fringe fact: rumors swirled that Napoleon's artillery shot off the Sphinx's nose. though historians still argue whether it was vandalism, erosion, or simply French canon etiquette gone haywire. Most evidence clears Napoleon. The nose likely vanished centuries earlier, courtesy of time or an iconoclast with poor aim. Still, the myth stuck. You trace the Sphinx's paw and notice inscriptions, some real, some graffiti from earlier conquerors. Napoleon's men begin cataloging, measurements, engravings, sketches. It's a flurry of Enlightenment curiosity. You peek at a sketch where the Sphinx has inexplicably been drawn holding a baguette. Artistic liberties flourish under desert heat. Napoleon's fascination deepens. He starts speaking of Egypt as the cradle of civilization, and wonders aloud if the Sphinx once guarded cosmic truths. You squint. Cosmic truths probably taste like sand. Night falls, and the stars above the Sphinx twinkle like sequins on history's robe. You sit by the monument, listening as French voices murmur theories, some scholarly, some wildly poetic. The face of the Sphinx looms silent, unreadable, patient. Its gaze hasn't changed for millennia, but tonight it's being read anew.
You crouch inside a tent dimly lit by lamp oil and murmur as Napoleon paces, hands behind his back, eyes burning with abstract calculation. He's just returned from inspecting yet another set of ruins, columns cracked by time, statues half swallowed by sand, and tonight his mind is spinning with symbols. You watch him gesture toward a carved lion-headed deity sketched on parchment. Its power, he mutters, its legacy. Then he stops, turns to you and asks, "Do you think lions know their kings?" Napoleon's obsession with iconography isn't casual. You trace back through his career, and you'll find he's always clung to symbols: Roman eagles, imperial wreaths, golden bees, each chosen with surgical precision to evoke past glories and future ambitions. His crest isn't just decoration, it's an argument. Now Egypt opens a new chapter in that book. Napoleon sees in the Sphinx something primal, a fusion of brute strength and divine wisdom. He tells his generals, "We stand among giants. Let our ideas be no less colossal." You try to write it down, but your quill snaps. It feels about right. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's fascination was genuine admiration or clever branding. After all, who wouldn't want to borrow a few thousand years of mystery and gravitas for their own myth-making? He's carving his image onto the stone of history. And if the stone happens to be shaped like a lion-headed riddle, even better. You skim through sketches littered across the table. One shows a French soldier bowing before a sphinx. Another, more dramatic, features Napoleon himself rising from sand as winged ibises swirl around him. Artistic license, full throttle. You notice several doodles have been stamped with the phrase Imperial Dream Series. Subtle. Fringe fact. In private correspondence, Napoleon reportedly described the Sphinx as the eternal witness to ambition.
you squint at the translation, might also read, "Annoying dusty statue." The French is tricky. Outside, a soldier sharpens a bayonet while quoting Herodotus. Egypt's hold on this expedition isn't just military, it's poetic. You breathe in desert air and smell destiny mixed with camel breath. The Sphinx watches from afar, unmoved. Napoleon watches back, trying to decipher what it takes to be immortal.
You crouch beside a French cart, loaded not with weapons, but with papyrus bundles, carved fragments, and half-melted wax figurines, vaguely shaped like Anubis. The wind kicks up sand into your teeth. Somewhere nearby, cannon fire echoes, but the focus here is ink, not powder. The Egyptomania fever is about to explode, and you're watching it hatch in real time. Napoleon's campaign doesn't just bring soldiers. It brings scholars, engineers, artists, and botanists. This isn't just war. It's an Enlightenment field trip. You peek over the shoulder of a scientist sketching a sphinx-shaped amulet. The caption reads, "Mystical entity, possibly decorative." You admire the honesty. Throughout the desert bivouacs, tents are filled with diagrams of pyramids, copies of hieroglyphs, and increasingly fanciful theories. A general asks whether the ancient Egyptians used electricity. A botanist paints palm fronds with dramatic shadows, arguing they symbolize eternity. You nibble a fig and wonder if civilization was always this theatrical. Fringe fact: Napoleon's troops included over 160 savants, specialists in everything from archaeology to hygiene. They documented every ruin, relic, and ruinous camel encounter. Their presence created one of the most intense cultural documentation efforts ever attempted in a war zone. Historians still argue whether the fever that spread back to Europe was spontaneous or perfectly engineered. Certainly Napoleon encouraged the scholars to publish. The goal? Make France look enlightened, sophisticated, and historically connected. And if they had to draw 800 sphinxes to do it, so be it. By 1800, French salons buzz with talk of pharaohs, sphinxes, and mystical geometry. Women wear scarab brooches. Children read bedtime stories about mummified cats. You glance at a children's book titled Bibi, the Friendly Sarcophagus, and feel curious. The fever burns hotter. Artists copy tomb frescoes. Architects design columns that curve like papyrus stalks. France wants to be Egypt, but with croissants. You sip warm tea and hear a soldier hum a tune inspired by Nile rhythms. That's probably a stretch, but even if the origins are shaky, the obsession is real. A press churns behind you, books stacked like stone blocks. And next, you'll see how all of Egypt gets printed, page by glorious page.
You step through a labyrinth of ink-stained cloth and copper printing plates where candlelight flickers over meticulous diagrams of jackal gods and pyramid cross-sections. This is where Egypt gets published. One sketch, one symbol, one page at a time. The room hums with quiet urgency. Bonaparte isn't here to just conquer Egypt. He's here to print it. You lift a thick folio marked Description de l'Egypte, the magnum opus of Napoleon's scholarly entourage. It weighs like a loaf of ambition. Inside,
Hundreds of detailed engravings, scientific notes, architectural studies, and some guesswork, like the drawing that shows a sphinx sleeping beside a telescope. Artistic license strikes again. This publication effort is unprecedented. Soldiers protect printing presses like sacred relics. Scholars barely sleep, sketching sphinxes by moonlight and debating which gods wore eyeliner. The goal? To immortalize France's presence in Egypt through academic thunder. Fringe fact: some pages of the Description de l'Egypte were so large they required special tables just to read them. You're peeking over one right now, trying not to drool on the rendering of Ramses II's toenails. Historians still argue whether this was genuine scholarship or political theater. The sheer volume and precision hint at sincerity, but the timing? Convenient. France returns from Egypt bruised militarily, but intellectually buffed. The books compensate where cannons fell short. You flip a page and find a fold-out diagram of the Great Sphinx, complete with dimensions, erosion commentary, and one note that reads, possibly a depiction of royal solar dignity. You whisper, "That sounds like a perfume." Someone nods behind you. These volumes ripple across Europe. Universities gasp, art academies clap. Sphinxes begin appearing in unexpected places: fountains, stage plays, and dinner menus. A French chef presents Sphinx à la crème. You decline. This publishing frenzy plants sphinxes deep into European imagination. They aren't just ancient, they're modern, trendy, potent. You stare at the engraved face of the Sphinx and see a mirrored silhouette, part history, part propaganda. And next, Napoleon starts wrapping it all around his own myth. You step into a warm salon lit by afternoon light and grand ambition. Napoleon sits upright, military jacket crisp, chin tilted just enough to look thoughtful and conquery. Behind him, a massive tapestry depicting, what else, a sphinx. It's not lounging in sand. It's floating through clouds next to a golden eagle and a bust of Julius Caesar wearing sunglasses. Okay, maybe not sunglasses, but the message is clear. Napoleon is writing himself into history with mythological flair. You sip thick coffee while examining a new portrait of Bonaparte. He's bathed in golden light, his hand outstretched toward a pyramid that wasn't there during the actual battle, but sure looks good with dramatic shading. The painter nods proudly, having layered in symbolic animals: a lion for courage, a falcon for foresight, and a sphinx because it's trending. This is Mythmaking 101. Napoleon seizes Egyptian imagery the same way influencers seize new fonts. He doesn't just want victory, he wants resonance. You notice that many paintings now feature Napoleon next to solar discs, temple columns, or hieroglyphs spelling out questionable Latin phrases like Conquestus Maximus. Fringe fact: one illustrator drafted a cartoonish scene showing Napoleon arm wrestling the Sphinx. The Sphinx looks unimpressed. Napoleon is losing. It was never published officially. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's Egypt-flavored iconography was sincere self-reflection or straight-up PR genius. Probably both. He was carving his likeness into cultural stone, some actual, some metaphorical, and the symbols he chose mattered. Sphinxes, pyramids, and pharaoh chic stylings told Europe he wasn't just conquering nations, he was conquering narratives. You flip through a campaign journal and find an entry that reads, "Saw the Sphinx again. It has not moved. It knows." That's either poetic or deeply paranoid. You nod either way. Outside, French officers rehearse formations beside sand-colored backdrops meant to resemble Karnak. The photographer waits for the perfect heroic pose. You suggest adding a camel. They laugh, but later, you spot a camel wearing a tricolor sash. That feels inevitable. The portraits grow more elaborate. Napoleon grows more legendary, and soon secret symbols get layered into it all. A few of those secrets might just come from the Masons.
You slip into a velvety salon somewhere in Paris, where the air smells like brandy, melted candle wax, and conspiracy theories. Overhead, a chandelier twinkles like a well-dressed secret. Beneath it, a cluster of gentlemen in tight waistcoats and rings glinting with esoteric symbols. Welcome to the world of Enlightenment-era Freemasons, a swirling mix of science, mysticism, and architectural obsession. Tonight, you're listening in on a debate. What does the Sphinx really mean? Napoleon wasn't just a general. He was a child of the Enlightenment, steeped in rational thought and vaguely interested in the spiritual weirdness that came bundled with it. He had connections to Masonic circles and thinkers who believed symbols held secret truths, not just decorative value. You sip wine and eavesdrop as one man insists the Sphinx hides the lost geometry of balance. Another claims it's a cipher from Atlantis. You try not to spit laugh into your goblet. Fringe fact: a Masonic lodge active in Egypt during Napoleon's campaign referred to the Sphinx as the threshold guardian. They held midnight meetings, pondered dreams beneath temple ruins, and may or may not have tried communicating through bird symbols. Historians still argue whether Napoleon genuinely embraced Masonic ideas or merely tolerated them for optics. He did attend Masonic-style ceremonies, and some symbols on his imperial regalia echo their iconography. But whether he believed in the Sphinx as a cosmic riddle is less certain. You suspect he believed in useful mystery, the kind that made people look twice. You leaf through a pamphlet discussing Egypt's veiled wisdom. It includes a diagram connecting the Sphinx's paw to the moon, Saturn's rings, and a particular brand of French cheese. You blink. Artistic liberties again. Symbolic readings of the Sphinx multiplied in Europe during this time. Enlightenment thinkers saw it as both scientific marvel and mystical muse. You overhear one Masonic member say, "To understand the Sphinx
is to measure the soul. You nod politely and wonder if they've ever had a normal Tuesday. Back in Napoleon's quarters, a new ring gleams on his finger, embossed with a lion head and a pyramid. It's subtle, stylish, and wildly on brand. The vibe shifts again as a slab of stone arrives, one that might finally teach Sphinxes how to speak.
You lean over a smudged work table as three French scholars squint at a hefty stone slab freshly hauled from Rashid, a port town already tired of hosting invaders. The slab is thick, dark, and glimmers with inscriptions etched in three scripts: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. You dust it off and read the label chalked by a soldier. Possibly magical rock, definitely heavy. History will remember it as the Rosetta Stone. Napoleon's savants go wild. Here, finally, is a key, a linguistic decoder ring for ancient Egypt. You hold your breath as one scholar whispers, "If we crack this, the Sphinx may finally speak." You nod dramatically, though the Sphinx's lips aren't exactly flexible. The Rosetta Stone becomes a pivot point in the Egypt craze. Scholars compare texts line by line, hunting patterns, speculating wildly. One insists the hieroglyph for sun looks like a baguette. You disagree. It's clearly a triangle with commitment issues. Fringe fact. During its early analysis, some linguists thought hieroglyphs were purely symbolic, no phonetic logic. Others swore they'd spotted recurring syllables. Historians still argue whether the stone truly changed Egyptology overnight or simply gave it permission to obsess more elegantly. You follow the slab's journey, first revered, then debated, then reluctantly ceded to British troops after France's departure. The handoff stings. Napoleon had wanted Egypt's secrets for France, and now the crown jewel of decoding is heading to the British Museum like it just won a lottery. Still, the stone's influence grows. You watch scholars write feverishly, produce essays titled Decoding the Divine and Did Pharaohs Like Puns? You whisper to a passing linguist, "Can it translate Sphinx riddles yet?" He laughs and says, "We haven't even reached nouns." You sketch your own glyph, a lion's paw wrapped around a scroll. It's nonsense. But tonight, nonsense feels sacred. The Sphinx doesn't speak, but thanks to the stone, someone might finally learn to listen.
You descend from linguistic revelation straight into dusty twilight. The Sphinx hasn't spoken, not literally, but minds are lit, theories brewed. Now you follow whispers and incense trails to a space carved from stone and serenity, a dream incubation shrine tucked behind a crumbled Greco-Egyptian temple. Someone hands you a linen pillow embroidered with a lion's tail. You thank them. They nod solemnly and vanish into mist. Napoleon's entourage didn't just scribble and sketch. They occasionally snoozed with purpose. Inspired by ancient rituals, some sought revelations through sleep, particularly near sacred monuments. You lie on a mat near the Sphinx's haunch, where dry wind rustles palm leaves like half-whispered spells. Around you, candles flicker beside offerings, rosewater, honey cakes, and one slightly melted wax ibis. You tuck your hands beneath your head and think scholarly thoughts, or at least try. You're told to dream deliberately, channel ancient kings, divine geometry, and questions about your place in history. You whisper, "Will I invent the next croissant?" And the wind shifts dramatically. You interpret that as yes. Fringe fact, some Enlightenment thinkers believed sleeping beside ruins enhanced cognitive insight. Others claimed dream incubation near the Sphinx could trigger prophetic visions or cures for skepticism. Historians still argue whether this was Enlightenment eccentricity or genuine mystic fascination. You doze. Your dreams are vivid. A sphinx wearing Napoleon's hat, 2 pyramids breakdancing, and a French officer trying to argue with a hieroglyph. You wake just as the officer loses. You scribble notes in your travel journal and title the page Sphinxisms and Sandwiches. Around you, other sleepers stir. One mutters about seeing the past carved into moonlight. Another murmurs, "The pause moved." You pretend not to hear that. Napoleon himself reportedly spent time alone near the Sphinx, reflecting, possibly napping, always absorbing. Whether he dreamed or not, he emerged convinced of destiny. You rise, stretch, and brush sand from your shirt. The Sphinx doesn't blink. You nod respectfully. Next stop, Parisian households where sphinxes migrate to mantelpieces, tableware, and teacups.
You push open a parlor door in Paris, where velvet drapes hush the light, and everything smells like rose-scented powder and over-frosted pastries. The room is ornate, a frenzy of empire style, and your eyes land on something peculiar perched atop the mantel. A miniature sphinx cast in brass, its face serene, its tail wrapped around an inkwell. You step closer. The base reads, "Triumph of Reason." You suspect it once held a candlestick shaped like a pyramid. Egypt has crept into domestic life. From Napoleon's campaign to high society's obsession, the imagery of sphinxes now fills drawing rooms, dressing tables, and dinnerware. You sip lukewarm tea and tap a spoon resting beside a porcelain saucer printed with lotus blooms and lion paws. This is Egypt by way of Paris. Mystical, decorative, and just a little confused. Artists produce figurines, clocks, and fireplace grates, all bearing sphinx heads, often stylized to resemble Marie Antoinette's cheekbones. Furniture feet curve like clawed paws. Wall panels depict Nile scenes, complete with sun-drenched temples and birds hovering like polite omens. You lean against a sofa shaped suspiciously like a sarcophagus. It's surprisingly comfortable. Fringe fact: Napoleon's sister, Pauline Bonaparte, commissioned a sphinx-shaped chaise lounge that was said to make guests feel divinely observed. A visiting diplomat reportedly refused to sit on it. Too much eye contact. Historians still argue whether this wave of decor represents genuine admiration for Egypt or pure aesthetic trend chasing. Certainly, the motifs exploded post-campaign. Part reverence, part exotic branding. You read a poem titled, "My Sphinx Clock Ticks in Time with Destiny." You chuckle. That's either brilliant or deeply concerning. Shops now sell sphinx-adorned paperweights, tiny obelisks etched with pseudo-hieroglyphics, and earrings shaped like falcons gripping scrolls.
Children play with wooden pyramids beside toy cannons. A salon hosts a monthly Cleopatra-themed lecture series, featuring topics like ancient moisturizers and modern romance. You recline beside a marble bust of Napoleon that seems to gaze longingly at a nearby bronze sphinx. The placement feels deliberate. You whisper, "Awkward." Back in the kitchens, copper pans feature sphinx handles. You watch a cook stir stew with a ladle shaped like a cobra. The flavors are French. The utensils are Pharaoh approved. Egypt is everywhere now. It's not just studied, it's consumed, repurposed, playfully misremembered. And next, it infiltrates art, with portraits that blend power, myth, and a suspicious number of lions.
You slide into the gilded hush of a portrait gallery, marble floors clicking beneath borrowed slippers. The walls ripple with imperial oil paintings, Napoleon in battle, Napoleon in robes, Napoleon lounging with a pyramid in the background like it's a casual weekend accessory. Every frame oozes power, myth, and one very persistent motif, the Sphinx. These portraits don't just flatter, they narrate. You examine one where Napoleon stands amid a swirling mist, flanked by two towering sphinxes whose paws gleam like freshly waxed boots. His expression? Serene authority, like he just solved both military strategy and hieroglyph grammar in the same morning. You squint and wonder if the sphinxes blinked? Probably not, but they feel alive. Artists of the Empire style layer these symbols with intention. Lions represent might. Eagles nod to Rome. Sphinxes evoke wisdom, mystery, and that elusive quality Napoleon adores, timelessness. You sip weak wine and note how the general's petite stature is counterbalanced by the enormous emblems surrounding him. He's 5 foot something, but his symbology stands 10 feet tall. Fringe fact: one artist painted Napoleon seated between two sphinxes labeled Truth and Empire. He requested they be edited to look slightly more muscular. They ended up resembling bodybuilders auditioning for a mythological gym. Historians still argue whether these symbols were chosen by Napoleon or imposed by court artists, eager to mythologize. Some claim he insisted on the inclusion of sphinxes. Others say they were part of a broader aesthetic moment, where everyone from duchesses to doormats embraced Egyptian flair. You step into a smaller room and find sketches, rough charcoal renderings of Napoleon's profile beside stylized hieroglyphs. A caption reads, "General as Osiris." That's ambitious. You leaf through an artist's notebook and see repeated drawings of lion-pawed thrones, celestial hats, and Napoleon riding a griffin. You close it gently. That's a lot to unpack. Outside, a statue awaits unveiling. Napoleon as Pharaoh, complete with cobra crown and a sphinx base. A critic murmurs, "Subtle." You choke on a grape. The art doesn't stop at canvas. Draperies feature motifs of lotus petals and scrolls. Grand staircases are flanked by plaster sphinxes, looking mildly judgmental. Even the wallpaper seems to whisper riddles about destiny. You exit into the sunlight, slightly dazzled and fully aware. Napoleon wasn't just painted, he was composed, brushstroke by brushstroke, with every feline symbol aimed at immortality.
And when you're 5 foot something in a world of giants, symbols speak louder than shoes.
Being regal and annoyed. You raise an eyebrow. Egypt has officially colonized the streetscape. It's not just salons and wallpaper anymore. Urban design across France absorbs Egypt like a sponge in the Nile. Public fountains feature lion paws and cobra heads. Park benches curve like miniature temples. You sit beneath an awning carved with falcons, and waiters dressed vaguely like prophets offer you bread shaped like scarabs. You chew politely. It tastes like regular bread with a confidence complex. Sphinx-headed furniture begins popping up in city offices, desks with claw feet and inkwells shaped like pyramids, and wastebaskets resembling sacred urns. Even the military gets in on it. Barracks doors are painted with stylized cartouches, and soldiers joke about papyrus leaf slips. One general requests a sword hilt modeled after Ramses II's jawline. It's denied, probably for safety. Fringe act. The famous Place du Caire in Paris was redesigned during the early 1800s to include sphinx heads above doorways, lotus patterns on columns, and friezes depicting ancient Egyptian processions. Some called it a tribute, others a fever dream with stone eyebrows. Historians still argue whether this architectural shift was sincere admiration or a way to turn colonial nostalgia into urban flair. The balance between homage and aesthetic consumerism remains fuzzy, but Napoleon's hand is evident. His vision for a modern imperial France wrapped itself in sphinx-shaped packaging and left no cobbled corner untouched. You walk past a newspaper stand offering the Sphinx Review, an arts publication featuring poetry shaped like obelisks. A headline reads, "Is Cleopatra fashion back?" You flip to page 6 and find a sketch of high heels shaped like papyrus leaves. You blink slowly. Even grave markers begin to echo Egyptomania. Cemeteries feature pyramidal headstones and stone felines watching over the dearly departed. One tomb inscription reads, "Eternity is better with good architecture." You nod. You pause by a bridge where iron sphinxes glare at riverboats. They seem to judge everything: traffic, weather, your scarf choice. But they also anchor the city to something older, grander, and weirdly comforting. Paris transformed, one statue, carving, and lamppost at a time. You glance at a street sign shaped like a cartouche. Egypt's influence isn't subtle, it's parade level. And now the museums swell with mummies, relics, and scholarly chest-thumping. You slip into the Louvre just before closing, where footsteps hush and marble statues pretend not to eavesdrop. The halls echo with history, paintings whispering of revolution, sculptures sighing in Latin. But tonight, you're heading somewhere else. Egypt. More specifically, into Napoleon's curated corner of sphinxes, sarcophagi, and hieroglyphs arranged like museum poetry. You navigate past tourists and curators in crisp vests until you reach the Egypt wing.
A dim, majestic space where artifacts gleam under careful lighting and everything smells faintly of old stone and proud wax. One display features a life-sized sphinx carved from granite, its body sleek, its face worn into serenity. Beside it, a plaque that proudly reads, "Acquired during Napoleon's Egyptian campaign." You raise an eyebrow. Acquired sounds friendlier than commandeered. The museum wasn't always this packed with Egypt. The transformation began post-campaign, fueled by intellectual fervor and a healthy dose of Napoleon's prestige strategy. Suddenly, mummies mattered, not for ritual, but for reputation. France wanted the world to know it wasn't just a military power, it was a scholarly empire. You watch visitors gather around a gilded funerary mask. A docent explains it reflects a transition between worlds. A child says, "It looks like Grandma's party hat." You nod, respectfully disagreeing. Fringe fact: when Egyptian artifacts first arrived in France, some were paraded through the streets. One Sphinx statue was accidentally placed backward on a cart, confusing spectators and offending at least 3 scholars. The Sphinx, to its credit, remained dignified. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's museum push reflected genuine curiosity or a political stunt to overshadow his battlefield losses. The reality? Probably both. The Louvre Egypt wing became a haven for intellectual performance, where scholars measured their prestige in ancient stones and translated secrets to win academic duels. You leaf through a visitor pamphlet and find a quote attributed to Napoleon. "A museum is the temple of civilization." You squint. It's possible he meant that. Or he just liked that museums didn't shoot back. French newspapers gush about the Egypt collection. Debates arise over authenticity, arrangement, and whether sphinxes look better facing west. Architects adjust museum lighting to replicate Nile sun. Someone installs a water feature meant to echo pharaonic purity. It smells like chlorine and ambition. Beyond the displays, museum salons host readings, salons, and Sphinx-themed soirees. You slip into one. A man recites poetry while wearing linen robes and sipping fig liqueur. You listen. The poem rhymes Ramses with franchise. It's brave. By now, the Louvre isn't just a repository, it's a statement. France understands greatness. It collects sphinxes the way some nations collect stamps. And Napoleon, whether glorified or gently roasted, stands behind it all. You exit into evening, the Sphinx lingering in your thoughts like a very opinionated roommate. Europe's not done with Egypt yet. The copycat era is about to begin.
You board a rickety train headed for Vienna, tucked beneath a blanket patterned with lotus flowers and slightly regretful lions. The carriage rocks gently as fields blur past, but your focus is fixed on the trend. Egypt mania has spread beyond France, and now every European capital wants a sphinx of its own. You sip dubious coffee and peer out the window as you approach a city that's about to embrace scarab-shaped street lamps and papyrus-themed dinner parties. The architecture hits first. Vienna's new boulevards boast sphinx statues flanking staircases,
obelisks crowning garden gates, and building facades carved with hieroglyphs that spell nothing but look impressive. You tip your hat to one such statue, and it almost nods back. Fringe fact: an Austrian confectioner once crafted a full pyramid from sugar cubes and named it Napoleon's Dessert Destiny. It collapsed mid-ball, coating several dignitaries in historical syrup. Historians still argue whether this Egypt mania was admiration, envy, or just fashionable rebellion against classical Greco-Roman trends. Either way, Napoleon's legacy clearly planted Sphinx seeds across Europe, some scholarly, some delightfully chaotic. Next stop, London. You disembark into foggy charm and stroll past the Thames where actual Egyptian obelisks, Cleopatra's Needle, stand upright, imported at absurd cost and effort. Locals sip tea beneath sphinxes carved in iron, less regal and more Victorian nervous. One statue's smirk looks suspiciously judgmental. You tip your biscuit respectfully. Museums flourish with mummy exhibitions and hieroglyph-themed gift shops. A scholar scolds you for mispronouncing Bastet. You nod apologetically and buy a bookmark with a frowning Anubis on it. Sphinx motifs appear in banknotes, brooches, and even stage plays. One musical titled Pharaoh's Fiddle features tap-dancing tomb raiders. You watch with quiet confusion. Germany isn't far behind. You wander through Berlin, where scholarly salons host debates on pyramid acoustics and spiritual geometry. A banker commissions sphinx-shaped safes. A school curriculum includes Egyptian ethics for modern youth. You sit in on a class where one student asks, "Did pharaohs eat waffles?" The teacher says, "Only metaphorically." Each city adds its twist. Vienna prefers floral motifs. London leans toward gritty grandeur. Berlin fuses Egypt with operatic gravitas. All fueled by Napoleon's initial flame, now flickering across fountains, fireplace mantels, and half-serious manifestos. You pause on a train platform as a quartet sings a ballad called "I Dreamed the Sphinx Wrote Me a Love Letter." It's surprisingly catchy and slightly unsettling. Europe embraced Egypt not just as art, but as an aesthetic performance. The Sphinx didn't just gaze across sand anymore. It stared down streets, bookshelves, and dinner plates. And now we arrive at the weird legacy: Napoleon, Sphinxes, and a few theories involving treasure maps and extraterrestrials.
You tumble into a dim Parisian study cluttered with maps, miniature pyramids, and a half-eaten fig tart that's seen better centuries. The shelves groan under books titled Secrets of the Desert and Napoleon's Celestial Architect. You're here for one final spin through the bizarre legacy that grew from Napoleon's brush with the Sphinx, and it's about to get very, very weird. On the table, a hand-drawn chart linking Napoleon's birth to lunar phases, Sphinx orientation, and the migration habits of ancient scarabs. You sip lukewarm mint tea and try to stay open-minded. Let's start with the treasure myth. One persistent tale claims Napoleon discovered a hidden chamber beneath the Sphinx during his campaign. Inside, gold, scrolls, and a celestial map pointing to a future empire? You raise an eyebrow. No evidence exists, but postcards certainly do. They're quite shiny. Fringe fact: A 19th century author argued that the Sphinx housed vibrational memory and Napoleon accessed it through intense brooding. Another theory suggests he met a time-traveling ibis who told him to colonize moonlight. You sip your tea louder. Historians still argue whether these myths reflect historical distortion or subconscious desire to make Napoleon larger than life, turning a 5-foot-something general into an eternal puzzle piece of pyramid prophecy. It's absurd. It's also weirdly poetic. Conspiracy forums flourish with tales of Napoleon hiding ancient relics and coding cryptic messages into palace architecture and building a secret Sphinx vault somewhere under Versailles. You visit a fan exhibit featuring paintings where Napoleon morphs into a stone Sphinx wearing an imperial sash. You nod slowly and back away politely. Even UFO theorists get involved. One essay titled Bonaparte and the Martian Glyphs claims the Sphinx is actually a spacecraft and Napoleon deciphered it before retreating from Egypt. You skim a paragraph and discover someone linked pharaoh hats to satellite dishes. You set the booklet down and check for exits. In pop culture, the Napoleon-Sphinx relationship continues. Films cast him as a dream seeker. Novels put him inside tombs, whispering riddles to shadows. One video game lets you play as Napoleon the Immortal Sphinx Wrangler. You win by correctly folding papyrus and not offending Horus. Through all this, one thing remains. The Sphinx still stares forward, stone-faced and slightly amused. Napoleon's fascination turned it into a mirror, one reflecting ambition, mystery, and the occasional baguette joke. You sit beneath a paper lantern shaped like a pyramid and think, maybe symbols survive not because they're true, but because they're beautifully confusing. And in that confusion, history gets to dream. And now the sand settles. The Sphinx closes its cosmic eyelids, and Napoleon's echo quiets to a whisper tucked inside a velvet-bound myth. You've wandered through battlefields that became libraries, symbols carved into wood and logic, dreams chased beneath moonlight and limestone. And though the journey stretched across salons, ruins, and sphinx-headed lampposts, it was always one thing at heart. A love letter to mystery. Let your thoughts drift now, gently, without conclusions. Let your breath fall into rhythm like hieroglyphs on desert wind. You've traced how one man saw ancient paws as stepping stones, how Europe danced with Egypt's allure, how symbols bloomed into furniture, fashion, and far-off theories involving lunar scarabs and mildly telepathic pyramids. You're safe here in history's gentle chaos. There's nothing left to decode. Just soft memories of Napoleon squinting at the Sphinx, trying to understand eternity before breakfast. The desert's breath cools. The fig tart is still forgotten. Somewhere, a museum Sphinx yawns. And you? You sleep, knowing that legends aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be carried.